My dad refused to spend a single penny on food. He said, "The earth is full of free sustenance," and since we lived in the suburbs, that meant we survived on grass, bugs, and rubber from old tires. He'd wake us up at dawn to forage, teaching us which weeds were almost like spinach and which beetles had the most protein. Mom would boil dandelions and clovers into a gray soup, while Dad lectured us about how grocery stores were scams. My stomach hurt constantly from eating things that weren't food, but Dad said that was just our intestines getting stronger. At school, other kids had sandwiches and chips while I unwrapped balls of cooked grass wrapped in leaves. The first time someone saw me eating a cricket, they screamed. After that, I learned to hide during lunch, choking down whatever forest salad Mom had packed while sitting behind the dumpsters. Teachers called home about my unusual lunches, but Dad convinced them we were just extreme health enthusiasts. When my brother Noah's hair started falling out, Dad claimed it was his body efficiently redirecting nutrients and made him eat more beetles to compensate. The tire rubber came later, when Dad decided we needed more iron in our diet. He'd find old tires on the side of the road and spend hours cutting them into tiny pieces with industrial scissors. "Rubber trees are plants," he'd explain while Mom boiled rubber chunks until they were soft enough to swallow. "This is just processed tree sap." The smell made our whole house reek like a burning factory. I'd gag trying to chew the black pieces that tasted like poison and stuck in my teeth. Winter was the hardest because nothing grew and the bugs disappeared. We survived on pine needle tea, dried grass from the summer, and Dad's expanding definition of edible. He started bringing home leather from old shoes, saying it was just processed animal skin. Chunks of drywall became mineral supplements. He'd grind up chalk and mix it into our water for calcium. Our bodies were eating themselves, ribs showing through our clothes. But Dad said we'd never been healthier. I started sneaking food at school, stealing bites of real sandwiches kids threw away. The first time I tasted bread after 2 years of grass and bugs, I cried. It was soft and filling and didn't hurt going down. I became obsessed with trash cans, waiting for people to throw away half-eaten apples or crackers. A janitor caught me digging through garbage and reported it, but when the counselor asked why, I couldn't tell her the truth. Who would believe it? My sister Luna figured out she could trade homework answers for food. She'd do kids' math in exchange for their fruit cups or cookies, hiding the food in her backpack to share with us later. We'd huddle in the bathroom stall passing around a bruised banana like it was treasure. But Dad found the food wrappers in her room and lost it completely. He said we'd been poisoning ourselves with corporate toxins and needed a full cleanse. The cleanse meant eating only grass for a month. Not weeds or plants that were almost like vegetables, just straight grass from our lawn. We'd spend hours grazing like cows, trying to fill our screaming stomachs with something our bodies couldn't even digest. Luna passed out at school, and when the nurse called, Dad told her it was a healing crisis, and that Luna's body was just adjusting to pure nutrition. That's when I snapped. I was 15, weighed 70 pounds, and couldn't remember what it felt like not to be hungry. I walked to the nearest McDonald's with $1 I'd found and bought a single cheeseburger. I ate it in 3 bites and immediately threw up, my shrunken stomach rejecting real food. But I didn't care. It had tasted like heaven. When I got home, Dad could smell the grease on me. He made me kneel in the backyard and eat dirt to cleanse the toxins, while lecturing about how I'd poisoned 3 years of pure eating. As I forced down handful after handful of soil, I made a decision. I'd keep eating garbage, stealing food, doing whatever it took to survive until I was 18. Then I'd leave and never look at grass the same way again. But the next week, Noah collapsed during morning foraging. He was so weak he couldn't stand, his body finally giving up after years of malnutrition. As the ambulance took him away, Dad screamed about how the doctors would pump him full of chemicals. But when the hospital called child services, Dad was ready. He'd been preparing for years, documenting our healthy lifestyle with photos of us smiling while foraging, essays we'd been forced to write about how great we felt, medical records from the holistic doctor who'd never actually examined us. The social worker who came looked tired and skeptical. Dad showed her our garden full of edible plants, the books on natural nutrition, the carefully edited videos of us choosing to eat foraged food. He explained how the hospital was overreacting, how Noah just had a minor stomach bug. Mom served the social worker pine needle tea and spoke calmly about raising children naturally. They'd done this before with concerned teachers, neighbors, even police. They knew exactly what to say. The social worker took notes and photos, but I could see her softening as Dad talked about the dangers of processed food and the benefits of ancestral eating. She probably saw overprotective health nut parents, not the reality of children slowly starving on grass and tire rubber. As she prepared to leave, she turned to me and asked if I had anything to add. I looked at Dad's calm face, knowing he had contingency plans for everything. This was my only chance to protect myself and my siblings, but I knew if I spoke out and it didn't work, I'd suffer in ways I'd never imagined. I had to choose. The social worker looked right at me and waited for an answer. I could feel Dad's stare burning into the side of my head like a physical weight pressing on my skull. My mouth went completely dry and my hands started shaking in my lap where nobody could see them. Every single survival instinct I had was screaming at me to keep my mouth shut, because I knew exactly what Dad did to people who betrayed the family. The dirt punishment was still fresh in my mind, and I could still taste the soil when I swallowed. I opened my mouth and heard myself mumble something about how we eat really healthy food, and Dad takes good care of us. The words felt like lies coating my tongue, but they were the safe words that would keep me alive. Dad's posture relaxed slightly next to me, and I saw him nod like he was satisfied with my answer. The social worker didn't change her expression, but she wrote something down in her notebook before closing it. She thanked us for our time and gathered her papers, and Dad walked her to the door with his hand on her back like they were old friends. I watched through the window as she got in her car and sat there for a minute writing more notes before she drove away. That night, after Luna and Noah went to bed, Dad pulled me aside into the kitchen. He put his hand on my shoulder and told me how proud he was that I stayed loyal to the family during the government intrusion. He said I showed real strength by not letting outsiders poison my mind with their corporate food propaganda. As a reward, he was going to teach me advanced foraging techniques that he usually only showed to adults. But then his face got serious and he added that we needed to be extra careful about what we brought into the house now that CPS was watching us. He said there would be stricter rules about the kitchen, and absolutely no more sneaking regular food from anywhere. His grip on my shoulder tightened when he said the word sneaking, and I knew he meant the garbage food I'd been eating at the school. I nodded and said I understood, and he finally let go of my shoulder and sent me to bed. After he went to sleep, I crept back downstairs as quietly as possible. I found the social worker's business card sitting on the kitchen counter where she'd left it next to the sink. I picked it up and stared at the phone number until I had every single digit memorized in my head. The card had her name and title and an office address downtown that I'd never been to. I took the card upstairs and used my scissors to carefully open a seam in the lining of my backpack. I tucked the card inside next to the food wrappers I'd been collecting as evidence for weeks now. The wrappers were from the garbage food I'd stolen, and I'd been saving them even though I didn't know why. Something about having that phone number hidden in my backpack felt like holding on to a lifeline, even though I was way too scared to actually use it. The next day at the school, I paid closer attention to which teachers actually noticed that I was disappearing inside my clothes. Most of them looked right past me like I was invisible, or maybe they saw but didn't want to deal with it. But the art teacher stopped me in the hallway between classes and asked if I was feeling okay. She actually waited for a real answer instead of just accepting my automatic response. I started to say I was fine, but something about the way she was looking at me made me pause. I filed that information away in my brain because I was starting to realize that not all adults were like Dad. Some of them might actually help if I could figure out how to ask without getting my family in worse trouble. During lunch, I made a decision and sat near the school counselor's office instead of hiding behind the dumpsters like usual. I unwrapped my ball of cooked grass and tried to eat it slowly while watching the hallway. Ms. Haynes walked by carrying a stack of folders, and I made myself speak up. I said something about how I'd been on a cleanse for way too long, and my voice came out quieter than I meant it to. She stopped walking and turned to look at me sitting there on the bench. She asked what I meant by cleanse, and I could see her face change when I mentioned that my whole family had been eating really pure food for years now. She set down her folders and sat next to me on the bench. She wrote down my name on a piece of paper and asked if I'd be willing to talk to the school nurse. I said maybe, which felt like the bravest thing I'd said in months, even though it was just one word. The next morning, Ms. Haynes pulled me out of first period and walked me down to the nurse's office. The nurse had me step on the scale, and I watched her face when the number came up. She made me get off and then get back on like she didn't believe what she was seeing. She weighed me twice and wrote down the number both times. Then she measured my height and asked me a bunch of careful questions about what I ate for breakfast. I told her about the dandelion greens, and she wrote that down too. She asked about my period, and I had to admit it stopped coming about a year ago. The nurse's pen moved across her paper, filling in boxes on some kind of form. She told me she was going to check in with me every single week from now on and document my weight. I felt this weird mix of relief that someone finally saw what was happening, and complete terror about what Dad would do if he found out. 2 days later, Dad announced at breakfast that we were doing homeschool week. He said he wanted to focus on our natural education, without the interference of the government school system. I knew immediately that this was because someone at the school had reported something, and he was trying to keep us away from people who might ask questions. Luna and I were sitting across from each other at the breakfast table, choking down boiled dandelion greens. Our eyes met over our bowls, and I could see the same fear in her face that was churning in my stomach. Dad spent the whole day setting up lesson plans and talking about how we'd have more time for foraging and nature studies. While Dad was outside collecting pine needles for our afternoon tea, I grabbed my notebook and carefully tore out pages. I started writing down everything I could remember with dates when possible. I wrote about when he first made us eat tire rubber and how many months that lasted. I wrote about the time he forced me to eat dirt as punishment for the McDonald's burger. I wrote down how long it had been since we'd eaten real food from a grocery store. I documented Noah's hospitalization date and the fact that his hair was falling out in clumps. My hand cramped from writing so fast, but I kept going until I heard Dad's footsteps on the porch. I folded the pages as small as possible and shoved them into the lining of my backpack next to the business card. If I was ever going to speak up, I needed evidence that was more than just my word against Dad's carefully prepared documentation. Mom caught me writing, and I froze, completely expecting her to yell for Dad. But instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a sugar packet from the coffee shop, where she sometimes went to run errands. She didn't say anything at all, but her eyes were wet and shiny. She squeezed my hand for just a moment before going back to the stove to stir the pot of grass soup. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever gotten from her, and it made me realize something important. Maybe she was as trapped as we were, and just too scared to fight back against Dad. On the 5th day of being kept home from the school, Luna almost fainted again while we were being forced to forage in the backyard. Dad was making us dig up roots and collect beetles from under rocks. Luna swayed on her feet and had to catch herself on the fence to keep from falling over. Dad saw it happen and called it a detox symptom that meant her body was releasing toxins. I watched her grip the fence post with white knuckles, and something inside me just snapped. I knew this was going to kill us eventually if someone didn't step in and make it stop. Dad made her eat extra beetles to boost her protein and handed her a whole handful of them still moving. I had to turn away so he wouldn't see the rage building up on my face. When we finally go back to the school 3 days later, the nurse calls me down for another weigh-in, and I can tell she's worried before I even step on the scale. She makes me take off my shoes and empty my pockets like maybe I'm hiding weights or something, and when the number comes up, she writes it down twice and measures my height again. I've lost 3 more pounds in 1 week. She sits me down on the exam table and asks directly if I'm being fed at home, and I can feel my heart racing, because this is the most direct question anyone has ever asked me. I give her a carefully worded answer about how my dad has very specific ideas about nutrition, and we eat a lot of natural foods from our garden. Ms. Haynes walks in right then, and they exchange this look that tells me they're taking this seriously, like they're communicating without words. The nurse says she's documenting everything and will be following up with additional resources, and she makes me promise to come see her if I feel dizzy or weak. I nod and leave, but I can hear them talking in low voices as I walk down the hallway. The next day, Dad gets a call from the school requesting a meeting about my nutritional needs, and he goes into full performance mode immediately. He pulls out his binders of holistic health research that he keeps in the office, the ones with highlighted passages about ancestral eating and traditional diets. He spreads photos of our garden across the kitchen table, pictures of us smiling while holding bunches of dandelions that he forced us to pose for months ago. He practices his speech out loud about the dangers of processed foods and how the modern medical establishment doesn't understand traditional diets. I listen from the hallway where he can't see me, and I realize how good he is at this, how he's perfected the art of making abuse sound like enlightened parenting. He rehearses his tone, making it reasonable and calm, explaining that we're just a family committed to natural living. Mom sits at the table nodding and adding comments about how healthy we all are, and I feel sick watching them prepare their performance. At the school meeting 2 days later, Dad brings all his documentation in a neat folder, and Mom sits quietly beside him nodding at everything he says. I have to sit there too while the principal and Ms. Haynes and the nurse listen to Dad's presentation. I watch the principal and counselor start to soften under his reasonable-sounding explanations as he shows the pictures of us smiling while foraging. He talks about how grocery stores are full of chemicals and preservatives, how we're learning to live off the land like our ancestors did. He mentions the garden and the educational value of understanding where food comes from. The principal nods and makes notes, and I can see Dad winning them over with his calm voice and his research binders. But then Ms. Haynes clears her throat and mentions that she's already filed a mandated report with CPS based on my documented weight loss and concerning statements. Dad's smile freezes for just a second before he recovers, and he launches into an explanation about how I'm just naturally thin and going through a growth spurt. The meeting ends with the principal saying they'll be monitoring the situation closely, and Dad shakes everyone's hands like he's won. 2 days later, the social worker shows up at our house without calling first, and Dad is furious but trying to hide it behind his usual calm face. He opens the door with this tight smile and asks to see her credentials, and he insists that any visits need to be scheduled in advance so he can prepare educational materials about our lifestyle. The social worker, Keith, says that surprise visits are standard protocol for active investigations, and he can either let her in now or she can return with police. Dad backs down, but his jaw is clenching as he steps aside. She schedules a formal follow-up for the next week, and I can see Dad agreeing while his hands are balled into fists at his sides. I know the next few days are going to be hell as he prepares his defense and makes sure we all know exactly what to say. Dad pulls us completely out of school the very next morning, claiming he's starting our official homeschool curriculum. I realize immediately that he's removing us from the daily witnesses who've been documenting our decline, from the nurse who weighs me and the counselor who asks questions. He sets up a schedule on the refrigerator where we spend mornings foraging in the backyard, and nearby woods, afternoons on what he calls nature studies, which is really just more foraging and learning about edible plants, and evenings writing essays about the benefits of natural eating. Luna and I are now completely isolated with no access to teachers or counselors who might help. The walls feel like they're closing in, and I can barely breathe when I think about being trapped here with no one watching. Dad hovers constantly, following us from room to room, and Mom watches us with this scared look in her eyes. In the tiny amount of privacy I have in the bathroom, I pull out notebook paper and start writing as fast as I can. I write out a detailed timeline with every incident I can remember and approximate dates. I write about the first time he made us eat tire rubber and exactly how many months that lasted. I write about the dirt punishment after the McDonald's burger and how many handfuls he made me eat. I document the grass month when Luna passed out and what Dad said about healing crisis. I write about the leather from old shoes and the drywall he called mineral supplements and the chalk in our water. I write about Noah's hospitalization and the fact that his hair was falling out in clumps. My hand cramps from writing so fast, but I keep going, filling page after page with dates and details and everything I can remember. When I'm done, I fold it up so small it fits in the change pocket of my jeans, and I hide the business card from the social worker in there too. This documentation feels like the only power I have left, the only weapon I can use against Dad's carefully prepared lies. What I don't know is that Ms. Haynes is sitting in her office at the school filing a formal mandated report with CPS. She types up everything she's observed over the past weeks, citing my documented weight loss with specific numbers from the nurse's records, Luna's fainting episode with the date and time, my coded disclosure about the cleanse and what that might mean, and the family's sudden withdrawal from the school, right when the investigation started. She attaches the nurse's medical documentation and her own notes from our conversations. The report triggers an investigation protocol that requires CPS to conduct a home visit within 72 hours and assess for immediate safety concerns. Somewhere in an office downtown, people are finally taking action while I'm trapped at home with no idea that help might be coming. The CPS worker arrives 3 days later for an unannounced visit and rings the doorbell at 10 in the morning. Dad answers, and I can see his face go red when he realizes who it is. He refuses to let her in without a warrant, citing his rights and demanding to see her credentials again even though he saw them last time. She explains calmly that she can return with police if necessary, and that refusing entry to an active investigation looks very bad in her report. Dad backs down, but he uses the few minutes while she waits on the porch to frantically arrange the living room. He tells us exactly what to say, hissing instructions about how we're healthy and happy and love our natural lifestyle. He shoves books about traditional diets onto the coffee table and opens the curtain so the garden is visible through the window. When he finally lets the CPS worker in, the space has been transformed into a showcase of his natural living philosophy, with everything perfectly staged. A police officer shows up the very next day for a welfare check after the CPS worker reported Dad's initial refusal of entry. Dad turns on all his charm, talking about constitutional rights and parental freedom, and how he's just trying to raise his children with good values. The officer looks around at the garden visible through the window, and the educational materials on the shelves, and ES kids sitting quietly on the couch in clean clothes. Nothing about the scene screams immediate danger to someone who doesn't know what happens behind closed doors, doesn't know what we're being forced to eat, or how our stomachs hurt constantly. The officer leaves after warning Dad to cooperate with CPS, and I feel hope slipping away as I realize how good Dad is at fooling people who only see what he wants them to see. I know I need to get my evidence somewhere safe where Dad can't find and destroy it. During the one trip back to the school for supply pickup, I tell Dad I need to use the bathroom and slip away into the building. I find an old locker in the abandoned hallway near the gym, one that doesn't have a lock anymore and the vent cover is broken. I tape my sealed envelope with the timeline and the business card behind the vent cover, pushing it back as far as I can reach. I memorize the locker number, 247, and the location, third hallway past the gym on the left. It's not much, but it's something concrete that exists outside of Dad's control, evidence he can't destroy or explain away. I rush back before he notices I'm gone, but my heart is pounding with this weird mix of fear and something that might be hope. Over the next few days, I go through the motions at home while something bigger builds in the background that I don't even know about yet. Noah is still in the hospital and Dad keeps calling them demanding his release, but they keep him for observation and more tests. What I find out later is that the hospital doctor sent all of Noah's lab results to his regular pediatrician, a woman named Dr. Pacheco, who's been tracking his growth for years. She pulls up his old records and sees the pattern, how his weight percentile dropped from healthy to dangerously low over 3 years, how his last checkup showed hair thinning and low energy that Dad brushed off as normal. The new hospital labs show severe problems with his blood, not enough protein or iron or basically any vitamin that bodies need to work right. Dr. Pacheco recognizes what she's looking at because she's seen it before in kids whose families can't afford food, except our family isn't poor, and Dad has a job. She writes up a report for CPS with all the medical records attached, and her professional opinion that Noah's condition came from not getting enough food over a long time period. And she specifically notes that this level of starvation doesn't happen by accident. The social worker gets this report in her email, and suddenly the case file isn't just about Dad's weird philosophy anymore. It's full of hard numbers and test results that can't be explained away. She calls our house and tells Dad she needs him to sign releases so she can get medical records for me and Luna too. And Dad tries to refuse, but she explains that he can either sign voluntarily or she'll get a court order. He signs because he thinks he can control what the records show, but he doesn't realize that lab numbers don't care about his natural living speeches. The social worker pulls everything and sees the same pattern in all three of us. Years of declining growth curves and missed checkups, and concerning symptoms that Dad always had an explanation for. She schedules separate interviews with each of us kids at the school where Dad can't be present, and I can feel the whole investigation shifting from them just checking on us to them actually building a case. Dad must feel it too, because the day after he signs those releases, he calls a family meeting and announces new rules about togetherness. Nobody is allowed to use the bathroom alone anymore. One parent has to be outside the door at all times. We can't have backpacks in our bedrooms. They have to stay in the front closet where Dad can check them whenever he wants. We're not allowed to close our bedroom doors even at night, and either Dad or Mom has to be present whenever we're doing anything, even homework. He says it's about strengthening family bonds and making sure we're supporting each other through this difficult time with Noah in the hospital, but I know exactly what it really is. He's terrified that one of us will talk to someone or hide more evidence, and he's making sure he controls every moment of our lives. The constant watching makes my skin crawl, and I feel like I'm trapped in a prison where the guards never sleep. Luna catches my eye across the dinner table while Dad explains the new bathroom policy, and I can see the same fear and anger in her face that's churning in my stomach. That night, I'm lying in bed with my door wide open, and Dad walking past every 20 minutes to check on me, and I hear a soft tapping on the wall that separates my room from Luna's. 2 quick taps, then silence. I wait a minute and tap back twice, and then I hear 3 taps from her side. Over the next few days, we develop a whole code using knuckle taps that we can do silently through the wall. 2 taps means danger or Dad is listening close by. 3 taps means I'm okay and it's safe to relax a little. 4 taps means we need to talk as soon as we get any privacy. We also start using hair ties as signals, assigning meanings to different colors so we can communicate across rooms without saying anything. Red means Dad is in a bad mood and we need to be extra careful. Blue means everything is relatively normal. Black means something happened that we need to discuss later. These small acts of secret communication make me feel less alone and remind me that Luna and I are on the same team fighting the same battle. One afternoon, Mom catches me alone in the hallway for maybe 30 seconds while Dad is outside collecting more pine needles. She grabs my arm and whispers really fast that she's scared of what will happen if I tell the truth to the social worker, but she doesn't actually tell me not to talk. Her eyes look desperate and sad, and I can see tears starting to form before she lets go and walks away. That moment hits me hard, because I realize she's trapped between being afraid of Dad and being afraid for her children, and she's too broken down to choose us over her own safety. It's the moment I understand deep in my gut that I can't wait for her to save us because she's not capable of it. If we're getting out of this situation, it's because I make it happen myself. The school finally lets us come back for a supply pickup, and I tell Dad I need to use the bathroom, and instead I slip into the nurse's office for just a minute. There's a bulletin board with health information, and I see a handout about something called refeeding syndrome, about how dangerous it is to eat normal food after your body has been starving for a long time. I read it standing there and learned that sudden access to regular food can actually damage your heart and other organs, because your body forgets how to process normal nutrition. It's scary to read, but also weirdly empowering because it means I understand something real about my own medical situation, something Dad never told us about. I fold the handout as small as possible and shove it in my sock, and that night I study it under my blanket with a flashlight, reading about electrolyte imbalances and cardiac problems, and how refeeding has to happen slowly with medical supervision. The next day, everything falls apart because Dad finds a contraband cracker in Luna's room that she got from trading homework answers with someone at the school. He completely loses his mind, screaming about how we've been poisoning ourselves with corporate toxins and undermining everything he's taught us. He drags both Luna and me out to the backyard and makes us kneel in the dirt while he stands over us yelling. He says we need a cleanse to counteract the processed food, and he's not asking. He's telling us to start eating the soil. Luna starts crying and trying to explain, but he just yells louder, so I grab a handful of dirt and shove it in my mouth to show her we have to just do it. The dirt tastes like chemicals and grit, and it sticks to my teeth and tongue, and I'm gagging, but I force myself to swallow while Dad watches with his arms crossed. Luna follows my lead, and we both sit there crying and eating handful after handful of dirt, while Dad lectures us about purity and natural eating and how disappointed he is. The humiliation of being 15 years old and eating dirt like it's a punishment for a dog does something to me. It turns all the fear and shame into this cold, hard determination to get us out no matter what it takes. When we finally go back to the school the next week for my regular weigh-in with the nurse, I've lost 2 more pounds, and she documents the continuing downward trend with detailed notes and measurements. She asks me to stand against the wall, and she takes photos of my protruding ribs and hip bones, and she asks permission to share the photos with CPS. I say yes without even hesitating because I'm past the point of feeling ashamed about what my body looks like. Ms. Haynes sits in on the appointment, and she tells me that people are working on my case, and I just need to hold on a little longer. That help is coming even though it doesn't feel like it right now. What I don't know is that the same day, a judge signs an order appointing a guardian ad litem to represent me, Luna, and Noah in the investigation. Her name is Natalie, and she's a lawyer who specializes in child welfare cases, and her job is to advocate for what's best for us regardless of what our parents want. She's already reviewing the case file with all the medical records and school reports and photos, and she's preparing to interview us at the school where Dad can't control what we say. 2 days later, Natalie shows up at the school with Ms. Haynes, and they pull me out of class to a private office. Natalie introduces herself and explains that she's my lawyer, that anything I tell her is confidential unless I'm in immediate danger, and that her only job is to make sure the court knows what's really happening and what we need. She asks me to describe a typical day in my house, and I start with the morning foraging routine. And once I start talking, it's like something breaks open inside me, and the words just pour out. I tell her about the tire rubber that Dad makes us eat and how he says it's just processed tree sap. I tell her about the grass and the beetles and how we're not allowed to have real food because Dad thinks grocery stores are scams. I tell her about the dirt punishment from last week and how my body hurts all the time from being hungry. Natalie takes notes without acting shocked or disgusted. She just listens and asks specific follow-up questions about dates and details and who was present for different incidents. She asks if I have any evidence, and I tell her about the envelope I hid in locker 247, and she writes down the location and says she'll make sure it gets retrieved properly. By the time the interview ends, I feel lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because someone finally knows the truth, but heavier because now there's no going back. When I get home from the school that day, the house feels different, like something shifted while I was gone. Dad's face is tight and angry in a way I haven't seen before, and he calls a family meeting in the living room where he makes us all sit on the floor while he paces. He tells us that the lawyer lady who talked to me at the school has been calling his phone and leaving messages, and she refuses to let him be present for any more conversations with us. His voice shakes when he says the word refuses, like he can't believe someone would dare tell him no. He rants about how the system is trying to turn his own children against him, how they're poisoning our minds with lies about processed food being okay. Mom sits in the corner looking small and scared, and Luna keeps her eyes on the floor. I don't say anything because I know that speaking up right now would make everything worse, but inside I feel this weird calm because I know that Dad losing control means the system is actually working. He spends the next hour calling Natalie's office over and over, demanding to speak to her, leaving long messages about his parental rights. When she finally calls back, I can hear her voice through the phone, calm and steady as she explains that her job is to represent what's best for us kids, not what he wants. She tells him she's legally allowed to interview us privately, and his attempts to interfere are being documented in the case file. Dad's face goes red and he starts yelling about government overreach before hanging up, and I can see his hands shaking as he puts the phone down. The next morning, Dad announces that we're not going to the school anymore. He says we need a family reset to reconnect with our natural lifestyle without outside interference, and he's starting our official homeschool curriculum today. None of us are allowed to use phones or computers, and we can't even close our bedroom doors anymore because he says we need total family openness. I know immediately that this is because the school people have been watching us and reporting things, and Dad's panicking because he's losing control of who we talk to. Luna and I exchange looks across the breakfast table where we're eating boiled grass, and I can see the fear in her eyes that matches what's churning in my stomach. We spend that whole day foraging in the backyard while Dad hovers over us constantly, watching everything we do. He makes us write essays about how healthy we feel and how grateful we are for our natural diet, standing over our shoulders as we write and correcting anything that doesn't sound positive enough. Mom moves around the house like a ghost, avoiding eye contact with anyone. At night, I try to tap our code on the wall to Luna, but I'm too scared Dad will hear, so I just lie there staring at the ceiling and counting the hours until someone realizes we've disappeared from the school. The next day is the same, and the day after that. We forage and write essays and eat grass while Dad lectures us about purity and toxins, and I feel like the walls are closing in. On the third day, I hear him on the phone with someone talking about accelerating our homeschool paperwork. And I know he's trying to make our disappearance from the school look official and planned instead of what it really is, which is him hiding us from the people who are trying to help. What I don't know is that while Dad's keeping us locked down at home, things are moving forward without him. The CPS worker files paperwork with the court requesting an emergency hearing for a court order that would let them enter our house without warning. The petition includes all the medical records from Noah's hospitalization, the photos the school nurse took of my bones sticking out, the notes from Natalie's interview with me, and a detailed argument about how Dad's pattern of blocking access to US kids creates a serious risk. The petition says that Dad's increasing isolation of us and his refusal to cooperate means evidence could be destroyed, and we could be harmed further before the normal investigation timeline runs out. A judge reads through all the documents and signs an order scheduling an emergency hearing for 3 days from now. The court sends notice to Dad's address, but he doesn't check the mail because he's too busy controlling every minute of our days, so he has no idea what's coming. On the 4th day of being trapped at home, I make a decision. I tell Dad I need to go to the school to drop off the homeschool paperwork he's been filling out, and I promise I'll go straight to the office and come right back. He's suspicious at first, but he's also desperate to make the homeschool thing look official, so he agrees as long as I'm back within an hour. I take the envelope of forms and walk out the front door, but instead of going to the school, I go straight to Natalie's office downtown. My hands shake as I push open the door to the building, and I have to ask the receptionist twice where to find her, because my voice comes out too quiet the first time. When I walk into Natalie's office, she looks surprised to see me, and I don't waste time explaining. I pull out the sealed envelope I've been hiding in my backpack lining, the one with the pieces of tire rubber and my dated notes, and the food wrappers and the dirt-stained napkin from the punishment. I put it on her desk and tell her about the other evidence I hid in locker 247 at the school, behind the broken vent cover in the abandoned hallway. She opens the envelope carefully and spreads everything out, reading through my notes with this focused expression. Then she tells me to wait right there, and she leaves the room, coming back 5 minutes later with copies of everything. She puts the originals in a file folder and hands me back the copies, and she looks me right in the eyes and says, "I just gave her exactly what she needs to prove this case." She asks if I'm safe going home, and I lie and say yes because I know if I tell the truth about Dad's lockdown, she'll have to report it immediately, and I need a little more time to figure out my next move. I take the homeschool paperwork and actually go to the school office to drop it off like I promised, and then I go home before Dad notices I've been gone too long. That night, I wake up to voices downstairs and I creep to the top of the stairs to listen. Dad's on the phone with someone and he's talking about Montana, about his brother's place where we could stay for a while until things calm down. He says the CPS investigation can't follow us across state lines, and we just need to disappear for a few months until the case gets closed for lack of evidence. He's making actual plans, talking about leaving in the middle of the night before the next scheduled home visit, packing only what we can fit in the car. I hear him say we'll pull out tomorrow night, that he's already told Mom to start gathering our important documents. My heart starts racing because I realize that if he succeeds, we'll vanish into some remote place where no one is watching, and no one can help us, and the abuse will get so much worse without any witnesses. I have maybe 24 hours to do something before we're gone forever. I creep back to my room and lie awake the rest of the night trying to figure out what to do, running through every option in my head. By morning, I know I have to call for help, even though I'm terrified of what will happen if Dad finds out it was me. Dad takes a nap after lunch like he always does, and that's when I make my move. I tell Mom I'm going to the library to get books for homeschool, and she's so distracted with packing that she just nods. I walk the 6 blocks to the public library and go straight to the bathroom where I lock myself in a stall. My hands shake so hard I can barely pull out the social worker's card I've been hiding in my shoe, and I have to dial the 911 number 3 times because I keep messing up. When the dispatcher answers, I force myself to speak clearly, even though my voice is shaking. I tell her that my father is planning to take me and my siblings out of state tomorrow night to avoid a CPS investigation, and I need help right now. She asks for my name and address, and I give her everything, and she tells me to stay on the line while she sends someone. I can hear her typing and talking to other people, and she keeps asking me questions about whether I'm in immediate danger and where my siblings are. I tell her we're all at home except Noah, who's still in the hospital, and she says officers are being sent to my address right now. She tells me to go home and stay calm and help is coming, and I hang up and run back to my house before Dad wakes up from his nap. I get back just as he's coming downstairs, and he asks where I've been. I show him the library books I grabbed on my way out, and he seems satisfied. An hour later, there's a loud knock on the front door. Dad answers it, and I see 2 police officers and the CPS worker standing on our porch, and one of the officers is holding papers. They tell Dad they have an emergency court order allowing them to enter and search the home for evidence related to the ongoing investigation, and when Dad tries to block the doorway, they push past him. He starts yelling about warrants and constitutional rights, but they ignore him and start going through everything. One officer photographs the pantry where bags of dried grass are stored in plastic containers, and the industrial scissors Dad uses to cut up tire rubber are sitting right there on the counter. The CPS worker finds the notebook where Dad tracks our cleanse schedules, with dates and notes about what we ate and how our bodies responded. They photograph the empty refrigerator with nothing but jars of beetles and containers of boiled weeds. They find the pile of leather scraps in the garage that Dad's been preparing for our next meal, and the bags of chalk powder he mixes into our water. Every piece of evidence that Dad thought was hidden or normal gets documented with photos and notes, and I watch his careful facade crumble as the truth gets exposed in a way he can't talk his way out of. He keeps trying to explain that everything is natural and healthy, that we're just living ancestrally, but the officers don't engage with his arguments. They just keep documenting and photographing while Dad gets more and more desperate. The CPS worker pulls me and Luna aside and asks us direct questions about the Montana plan and whether we feel safe at home. Luna starts crying, and I tell the truth about everything, about being kept home from the school, and not being allowed to close our doors, and Dad planning to take us away tonight. The worker makes some phone calls, and then she comes back and tells us that based on the evidence of ongoing harm, and Dad's plan to flee the state, she's making the decision right now to emergency remove all 3 of us kids from the home. She says Noah will stay at the hospital under protective custody, and Luna and I need to pack a bag with whatever we want to take. Dad loses it completely when he hears this, screaming about government kidnapping and his parental rights, but the police officers stand between him and us while we go upstairs to pack. I throw random clothes into my backpack along with the few things that matter to me, and Luna does the same. Mom just sits on the couch crying and doesn't try to stop what's happening. When we come back downstairs with our bags, the CPS worker leads us out to her car while Dad shouts after us about how we're betraying the family and we'll regret this. As we drive away, I look back and see him standing in the doorway still yelling, and I feel this weird combination of grief for the family I'm losing and relief so intense it makes me dizzy. Luna grabs my hand in the backseat and squeezes hard, and neither of us says anything as we drive through familiar streets towards somewhere unknown. The foster home is in a neighborhood that looks normal, with houses that have real grass lawns and cars in driveways. The CPS worker walks us to the door, and a man named Max answers, and his wife comes up behind him smiling gently. They're both calm and patient as they show us our rooms, which are small but clean with actual beds and dressers. Max explains the house rules about mealtimes and chores and bedtime, and his wife shows us where the bathroom is and how to work the shower. I can barely process anything they're saying because my brain feels fuzzy and overwhelmed, like I'm watching everything happen from far away. They give us each a welcome basket with basic toiletries and some snacks, and Max's wife says we can eat whenever we're hungry, and there's always food in the kitchen. That night, a nurse comes to do our intake medical exam, checking our weight and height and looking at our teeth and skin. She draws blood for labs and asks questions about our medical history, writing everything down in a chart. When the results come back a few days later, they confirm what everyone already knows, that we're really malnourished with dangerous deficiencies in basically every vitamin and mineral. A doctor named Layla Pacheco gets assigned to our case, and she creates a careful refeeding plan that starts with small amounts of easy-to-digest food like broth and crackers, and slowly increases over weeks to include more variety and bigger portions. She explains that our bodies need time to adjust to real food again, and eating too much too fast could actually make us sick. My first night in the foster home, I try to sleep in the actual bed, but it feels too soft and exposed, like I'm floating in space with nothing to hold on to. I end up pulling a blanket off the bed and curling up in the closet with the door half open, and that feels safer somehow. Before I go to sleep, I take the granola bars from the welcome basket and hide them under the mattress, even though I know there's a full kitchen downstairs with food I'm allowed to eat whenever I want. Years of food scarcity have rewired my brain into constant hoarding mode, where every bit of food needs to be hidden and protected in case it disappears. Around 2 in the morning, I wake up to the closet door opening wider, and Max's wife is standing there in her bathrobe looking concerned but not mad. She doesn't make me feel weird about sleeping in the closet or ask a bunch of questions about why I can't use the bed. She just sits down on the floor nearby with her back against the wall and starts talking quietly about how the house is safe and no one will take my food and I can eat whenever I'm hungry. She tells me about the other foster kids they've had over the years and how everyone needs different things to feel okay, and sleeping in closets is actually pretty common. Her voice is calm and steady, and after a while I feel my body start to relax, and eventually I fall asleep with her still sitting there keeping watch. The next morning, Keith comes to the foster home and tells me the social worker arranged a supervised phone call with Mom for that afternoon. I spend the whole day nervous and jumpy, not knowing what to expect or what she'll say to me. When the time comes, I sit in Keith's office at the CPS building with him right there listening, and the phone feels heavy in my hand as I dial the number they gave me. Mom's voice comes through the line sounding calm and almost relieved, not angry or desperate like I thought she'd be. She says she's glad we're somewhere safe and that she hopes we're eating better now, and her tone is so normal it throws me off completely. I wait for her to apologize or admit that what happened was wrong, but she doesn't say any of that. She also doesn't defend Dad or beg me to come home or tell me I betrayed the family. She just asks basic questions about how Luna and Noah are doing and whether the foster parents are treating us okay. It's like she's in some kind of shock or denial where she can't fully process what happened, and the conversation feels weird and disconnected. When I hang up after 10 minutes, I feel more confused than comforted, because I don't know what to do with a mom who sounds relieved but won't actually acknowledge the truth. Keith sees my face and suggests we talk about what happens next, so we move to a different room with more comfortable chairs. He sits down across from me and explains the whole court process step by step, walking me through how there will be hearings where a judge decides what's best for us kids. He tells me I might have to testify and describe what happened at home, and that Dad and Mom will have chances to present their side of the story too. He explains my rights and options, like how I can have a lawyer just for me who represents what I want, and how the court will consider my wishes since I'm 15. Having all this information laid out clearly makes everything feel slightly less scary, because at least I know what's coming. Keith is honest with me in a way that feels respectful, not like he's trying to protect me from reality. He says the goal is safety first, and then figuring out what kind of family reunification might be possible if my parents complete services like parenting classes and therapy. But he's also honest that it might not be possible at all, especially with Dad, and that some families can't be put back together safely. I appreciate that he doesn't give me false hope or make promises he can't keep. Over the next few days, I settle into a routine at the foster home with regular meals and school and therapy appointments, but then Keith calls to tell me something that makes my stomach drop. Dad started posting rants on social media about government overreach and CPS kidnapping, sharing his version of events where he's a persecuted father trying to raise healthy children naturally. He's writing long posts about how the state stole his kids for following an ancestral diet, and he's sharing photos of our garden and his nutrition books as proof that he did nothing wrong. The posts get shared in natural living communities, and suddenly our case is being discussed online by hundreds of people who don't know the full story. They're calling us brainwashed by big agriculture and saying Dad is a hero standing up to corporate food propaganda. Reading the comments makes me feel sick because these strangers are defending someone who made us eat tire rubber and dirt, and they think they're supporting some kind of freedom fighter. Keith says the judge found out about the posts and issued an order requiring Dad to stop discussing the case publicly because it could compromise the court proceedings and violate our privacy. Dad takes the post down, but the damage is already done, with screenshots floating around and people arguing about our family like we're some kind of political debate. A few days later, Natalie calls and asks if Luna and I can come to her office for a meeting. And when we get there, she sits us down at a conference table with notebooks and pens. She explains that we might need to testify in court about what happened at home, and she wants to prepare us so we know what to expect. She tells us we need to stick to specific facts with dates rather than general statements like, Dad was mean, or we were always hungry. She has us practice answering questions about particular incidents, asking us to describe the grass month with details about when it started and how long it lasted. Luna and I take turns practicing while Natalie writes down notes and asks follow-up questions, teaching us how to stay calm if Dad's lawyer tries to confuse us or make us second-guess our memories. She explains that the lawyer might ask things like, are you sure it was a whole month? Or, didn't your father also give you other foods? And we need to stick to the truth without getting flustered. Luna is terrified and keeps asking what happens if she forgets something or says the wrong thing, and Natalie reassures her that it's okay to say I don't remember if she truly doesn't. But I feel this weird sense of competence growing inside me, like finally my voice is going to matter and people will have to listen. We practice for 2 hours, going over the tire rubber and the dirt punishment, and the times we passed out, and by the end I have my timeline memorized with specific dates and details. Meanwhile, Dr. Pacheco is working on her part of the case, and Keith tells me she submitted a detailed affidavit to the court, explaining Noah's medical condition when he was hospitalized. The affidavit includes all his lab results showing severe malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, and protein levels that proved he'd been starving for a long time. She wrote her professional opinion that the harm was caused by inadequate nutrition over a prolonged period, not by any sudden illness or accident like Dad tried to claim. She included research articles about the health effects of the specific things we were forced to eat, with studies about how tire rubber contains toxic chemicals, and how eating dirt can cause parasites and intestinal damage. She explained the refeeding protocol we're on now and why our bodies need careful monitoring as we recover. Her medical testimony is clear and unambiguous in a way that's hard for Dad to argue against, because it's not about parenting philosophy, it's about objective medical facts and lab numbers. The court date arrives faster than I expect, and Keith drives Luna and me to the courthouse in the morning. The building is big and official looking with metal detectors at the entrance and people in suits walking around with briefcases. We wait in a room outside the courtroom with Natalie, and she goes over last-minute reminders about staying calm and speaking clearly. When we finally go into the courtroom, I see Dad sitting at a table with his lawyer, and he's wearing a suit I've never seen before. He looks calm and reasonable, not like someone who made his kids eat grass and rubber, and I realize he's been planning for this moment just like he planned everything else. The judge comes in, and everyone stands up, and then the hearing starts with Dad's lawyer calling him to testify first. Dad's testimony is polished and practiced as he explains his philosophy about natural eating and ancestral health, talking about how humans evolved to eat foraged foods and how modern processed foods are causing disease. He presents his documentation, the binders full of research articles and photos, and our forced essays, and talks about how he was trying to protect us from the dangers of chemicals and preservatives. I watch some people in the courtroom nodding like he makes sense, and I feel panic rising because he's so good at this performance. The social worker gets cross-examined by Dad's lawyer, who asks whether CPS overreached and whether our case really met the threshold for emergency removal, suggesting that maybe we were just a family with unusual but legal lifestyle choices. The judge asks pointed questions about the medical evidence and Dad's plan to flee the state, and I can tell she's taking this seriously, but also being careful about overstepping parental rights. She voices concern about whether the state has proven its case strongly enough, and mentions the possibility of reunification with services, and my stomach drops because I realize we might actually be sent back. Natalie catches my eye from across the room and gives me a small nod that says to trust the process, but I feel like I'm going to throw up. The hearing breaks for lunch, and we eat sandwiches in a conference room, but I can barely swallow because I'm so anxious about what's coming next. Luna testifies after lunch, and she's shaking so hard she can barely speak at first, her voice coming out in whispers that make the judge ask her to speak up. But when the judge asks her to describe the grass month, something shifts and her voice gets stronger, like she's been holding this story inside for too long. She talks about eating only grass from the lawn for 30 days, about how Dad made us graze like animals and said it would purify our bodies. She describes how her stomach cramped constantly, and she couldn't think straight in the school, how everything hurt, and she felt dizzy all the time. She tells about passing out in the hallway and waking up in the nurse's office, and how Dad called it a healing crisis when the nurse called home. By the time she describes the nurse's worried face and how scared she was, there are tears running down Luna's face, and several people in the courtroom look visibly upset. Dad's lawyer tries to cross-examine her, but Luna holds firm on her story, and I feel proud of her for being brave enough to tell the truth. When it's my turn to testify, I walk to the witness stand with my notes in my pocket, and I focus on being specific and factual like Natalie taught me. I describe the timeline of escalating food restrictions, starting with the foraged weeds and moving through the beetles and tire rubber and eventually the leather and dirt. I present the envelope with the rubber pieces and my dated notes, explaining how I collected evidence because I knew we'd need proof. I talk about the tire rubber and how Dad said it was just processed tree sap from rubber trees, about how Mom would boil it for hours until it was soft enough to swallow. I describe the dirt punishments when he caught me with real food, and the leather from old shoes that he claimed was just processed animal skin. I explain about stealing food from garbage cans at the school because I was so hungry I couldn't think about anything else. Dad's lawyer tries to suggest I'm exaggerating or that I misunderstood Dad's intentions, but I have dates and details and physical evidence that backs up everything I'm saying. I watch the judge's expression shift from skeptical to convinced as I lay out the facts, and I feel this surge of power knowing that finally someone is really listening. The last witness of the day is Mom, and she gets called to testify looking small and scared in a way that makes her seem fragile. She gets sworn in and sits in the witness chair, picking at her fingers, and when the lawyer asks if she participated in the food restrictions, she starts crying. She admits that she boiled the tire rubber at Dad's insistence and served us the grass and beetles, and she says she was afraid to stop because Dad would get angry. She describes how he'd yell if she tried to give us regular food, and how he controlled all the money so she couldn't buy groceries even if she wanted to. It's not a full confession, and she still tries to minimize some things, saying stuff like, "I thought the foraged greens were actually healthy," and "I didn't realize how bad it had gotten." But it's the first time she's publicly acknowledged that what happened was wrong, and I feel this complicated mix of anger and sadness and relief. I'm angry that she didn't protect us sooner, sad that she was trapped too, and relieved that she's finally admitting the truth even if it's not the full truth yet. The judge steps back into the courtroom after a 20-minute recess and everyone stands up until she sits down behind her big wooden desk. She looks at her papers for a second, and then starts reading her decision out loud in this calm voice that makes every word feel heavy and final. She says the evidence clearly shows that harm occurred to all 3 children, and that our safety requires us to stay out of the home while our parents address the serious concerns the court has documented. Dad has to do supervised visits only with specific conditions. Mom needs parenting classes and individual therapy, and we kids have to keep getting medical monitoring to make sure we're recovering properly. The judge lists off all these requirements in this official way, and I sit there trying to process that we're actually staying in foster care, that the system is actually protecting us this time. When she finishes reading the order, I feel like I can breathe for the first time in weeks, like there's this weight that's been sitting on my chest since Noah collapsed, and it finally lifts just enough that I can take a full breath without my ribs hurting. The foster home has this dietitian who comes twice a week to work with me on eating normally again, and she's patient in a way that makes me feel less broken. She explains that my stomach has physically shrunk after years of not getting enough food, and that we need to increase my meals gradually so my body can adjust without getting sick. We start with small portions of really bland stuff like plain rice and boiled chicken, and she teaches me to pay attention to when I'm actually hungry, versus when I just feel empty from habit. The first few days I want to eat everything in sight because there's actual food available. But she shows me how to eat slowly and stop when I'm full instead of stuffing everything down like it might disappear. She gives me this chart where I track what I eat and how I feel after, and looking at the numbers helps me see that I'm getting enough, even when my brain still screams that I'm starving. The hoarding impulse is still really strong though, and I catch myself hiding crackers in my pillowcase, even though I know the kitchen is always stocked. Getting re-enrolled at my old school takes about a week of paperwork and meetings, and when I finally walk back into the building, it feels weird and normal at the same time. Ms. Haynes checks in with me every few days to see how I'm adjusting, and she doesn't make it feel like pity or charity, just like she actually cares. The first time I eat lunch in the cafeteria without hiding is this huge thing that probably looks tiny to everyone else. I sit down at a table with other students and unwrap a turkey sandwich and apple slices from the lunch line, and nobody stares or asks questions or acts like it's weird. I take a bite of the sandwich and it's soft and has mayo and lettuce and tastes like regular food, and I have to blink really hard to keep from crying right there in front of everyone. The normalcy of it hits me in this overwhelming way. Like I'm finally allowed to be a regular teenager who eats lunch with other kids instead of hiding behind dumpsters choking down grass. A girl at the table asks if I'm new, and I say I used to go here before, and that's it. The conversation just moves on to homework and weekend plans like I'm just another person. The first supervised visit with Dad happens 2 weeks after the court ruling at a CPS office with a social worker sitting in the corner taking notes. Dad sits across from me at this small table and tries to start talking about how everything he did was for our health, and how we'll understand when we're older. I interrupt him before he can get into his whole speech about natural living and corporate toxins. I tell him I don't want to discuss his reasons. I just want him to acknowledge that we were hurt by what happened. He looks at me like I've betrayed him, and starts talking about how the court doesn't understand ancestral eating, and how the medical system is wrong about nutrition. I watch him reframe everything as misunderstood parenting, and I realize he's never going to actually admit he was wrong. After 20 minutes of him making excuses, I tell the social worker I'm done with the visit and I stand up to leave. Dad's face goes red and he starts to say something, but the social worker tells him the visit is over. Walking out of that room makes me shake so hard I have to sit down in the hallway, but I also feel stronger because I set a boundary, and it actually got enforced. Mom visits separately the following week, and the whole conversation is different from the start. She cries as soon as she sits down and tells me she's sorry for not protecting us, and she admits she was afraid of Dad and didn't know how to leave. I don't say anything at first because I'm not ready to forgive her yet. The hurt goes too deep for that. But then she tells me she's applied for a housing voucher so she can live separately from Dad, and she's attending parenting classes twice a week at the community center. She shows me a certificate from the first class she completed and asks if we can do phone calls sometimes. I tell her maybe, that I need time to figure out how I feel, but I can see she's actually trying to change instead of just making excuses. It creates this tiny opening for maybe rebuilding something eventually, though I don't know what that would look like, or if it's even possible. The case plan gets formally written up and documented with the court about a month after the ruling. Keith, the social worker, goes over every requirement with me so I understand what's supposed to happen. Dad has to complete a psychological evaluation and parenting classes. Mom has to maintain separate housing and finish her services, and we kids have to attend therapy and keep all our medical appointments. There can be no unsupervised contact with Dad until another court review, and Mom can work toward unsupervised visits if she keeps making progress. Having everything written down with clear expectations makes me feel safer, because there are actual rules and consequences now instead of just Dad's random control. The case plan is this official document that everyone has to follow, and knowing that helps me sleep better at night. Natalie files a recommendation with the court arguing that there should be no reunification with Dad until he demonstrates real compliance and genuine understanding of the harm he caused. She writes that we kids need stability and safety while we heal physically and emotionally, and that rushing reunification would be re-traumatizing for all of us. She includes quotes from my testimony and Luna's and references the medical evidence about our malnutrition. The judge reads the recommendation and orders a review hearing in 6 months to check on everyone's progress with the case plan. 6 months feels like forever, and also not long enough. Like I want time to heal, but I'm scared of what might happen at that next hearing. Dad violates the court's social media order about 3 weeks later by posting a bunch of rants about CPS corruption and government overreach on his blog. Someone reports it to the court, and the judge holds a hearing about the violation where Dad tries to argue it's his First Amendment right to talk about his case. The judge is not having it and issues a stern warning, plus she requires him to complete the psychological evaluation within 30 days or face contempt charges. Every time Dad violates a boundary like this, I actually feel a little bit safer, because it proves the system is protecting us this time, that there are consequences when he breaks rules. I catch myself hoarding crackers in my backpack again about 2 months into foster care, and I feel so ashamed when the foster mom finds them. She doesn't yell though, she just sets up a meeting with my therapist Tanner. He explains that hoarding food is a totally normal trauma response to years of food insecurity, and that my brain is still wired for survival mode. We work on creating what he calls a safe snack plan, where I'm allowed to keep certain foods in my room but in a designated basket on my dresser, instead of hidden around the space. He helps me understand that my survival behaviors made sense when I needed them, and that they can be gently redirected rather than just stopped cold. Learning that I'm not broken or weird for hoarding food helps me be less hard on myself about it. Luna finishes an entire fruit cup at dinner one night without gagging or crying, and afterward we end up in the bathroom together brushing our teeth. She looks at me in the mirror and says it's weird to be excited about eating peaches, and we both start laughing. It's the same bathroom where we used to hide and split a bruised banana while choking down our fear, but this time we're laughing instead of crying, and the memory feels like it's being rewritten just a little bit. Luna does this silly dance about how good the peaches were, and I join in, and for a few minutes we're just sisters being goofy instead of survivors processing trauma. These small moments of actual joy feel fragile but real, like maybe we're going to be okay eventually. 6 weeks later, the hospital calls to say Noah can come home to the foster house, and Luna and I ride with Max to pick him up. When we get to his room, Noah is sitting on the edge of the bed wearing actual clothes instead of a hospital gown, and his face looks fuller, less like a skeleton with skin stretched over it. He stands up when he sees us and walks across the room without wobbling or grabbing onto anything, and Luna starts crying immediately. I hug him carefully because I'm still scared he might break, but he hugs back hard enough that I know he's actually getting stronger. The nurse goes over his nutrition plan and physical therapy schedule with Max, while Noah shows us the folder of discharge papers that's thicker than a textbook. On the drive back to the foster house, Noah sits between Luna and me in the back seat and keeps touching his hair where it's starting to grow back in weird patchy spots. He tells us about the physical therapist who made him do exercises that felt impossible at first, but got easier every week. When we pull up to the house, Noah gets out of the car by himself and walks up the front steps, and I feel this huge wave of relief, because all 3 of us are finally together and safe in the same place. The 6-month court review happens on a cold morning in February, and we all sit in the courtroom while the judge reads through reports from everyone involved in our case. She says Luna, Noah, and I have all gained healthy amounts of weight, and our therapy attendance has been consistent. Mom's report shows she secured a one-bedroom apartment across town and completed all 12 weeks of parenting classes, plus she's been going to individual counseling every week. Dad's psych evaluation results get discussed, and the judge's face gets serious when she reads the part about his limited insight into his behavior and his continued belief that his parenting choices were justified. The judge orders the case plan to continue with us staying in foster care, but she says Mom can start working toward unsupervised visits if she keeps making progress. Keith, the social worker, nods and makes notes while the judge talks about review dates and service requirements. A few weeks after court, I have a supervised visit with Dad at the CPS office, and the social worker sits in the corner with her clipboard, while Dad and I sit across from each other at a table. He starts talking about how the family needs to reunify and how I need to understand that everything he did was for our health. I interrupt him and say, I don't want to talk about reunification, and his face goes red. He stands up so fast his chair scrapes backward and starts yelling that we're traitors who abandoned the family and will regret turning our backs on natural living. The social worker stands up and tells Dad the visit is over and he needs to leave immediately. He's still yelling about government interference as she walks him out, and I sit there feeling my heart pound but also feeling strangely calm. The social worker comes back and asks if I'm okay, and I tell her I am because watching Dad lose control like that just proves I made the right choice to stay away from him. She writes everything down and says she'll file a report with the court. The next month, school support finally locks into place and I get called down to the counselor's office to go over everything. Ms. Haynes shows me the transportation plan where a van will pick me up from the foster house each morning, so I don't have to ride the regular bus where kids might ask questions about why I'm not living at home anymore. She hands me paperwork for the free meal program. That means I never have to worry about lunch or feel weird about not having money. The schedule she gives me includes 3 periods where I can make up credits I missed during the worst times when Dad kept us home and I was too hungry to focus on schoolwork. Having all these practical supports written down on official forms makes me feel like the system is actually working to help me succeed, instead of just watching to make sure I don't die. Natalie meets with me at her office to help write a formal statement for my case file about what I want to happen with my family. She explains that the court wants to hear directly from me about my wishes for the future. I write that I don't want any contact with Dad unless he completes every single service the court ordered and can prove he actually understands that he hurt us. I write that I'm open to maybe rebuilding something with Mom if she keeps living separately from Dad and keeps going to therapy, but that I need time and space to heal first. Natalie reads what I wrote and says it's clear and strong and exactly the kind of boundaries I have a right to set. Putting everything in writing and knowing the judge will read my actual words makes me feel powerful in a way I've never felt before. The permanency plan gets drafted right after that with specific conditions about Mom potentially getting us back eventually. The plan says Mom has to keep her own apartment separate from Dad for at least 6 months and complete all her services successfully. It includes continued therapy for all of us kids, regular doctor appointments to monitor our health, and a schedule for visits with Mom that gradually builds toward unsupervised time. Natalie explains that it's not perfect, but it's a path forward that keeps us safe while leaving room for family healing, if Mom can actually sustain the changes she's making. Over the following weeks, the foster home shifts from feeling temporary to feeling almost permanent as Max and his wife tell us they're willing to keep us for as long as we need to stay. We develop actual routines like family dinner every night where everyone shares one good thing from their day. Friday nights become movie nights where we take turns picking what to watch, and Max makes popcorn with real butter. There's a chore chart on the refrigerator that treats us like capable people who can contribute instead of like victims who need to be handled carefully. Having this predictable structure with adults who are consistent and kind starts to feel normal in a way I didn't think was possible. 6 months later, we're back in court for another review hearing, and the judge goes through everyone's progress reports. She says all 3 of us kids have gained healthy weight, and our lab results show our vitamin levels are finally in normal ranges. Mom's report shows she's kept her apartment and her job at the grocery store for 8 full months, and she hasn't missed any therapy appointments. Dad's report says he completed some of the required services, but the therapist's notes show he still minimizes what he did and hasn't earned back any visitation rights. The judge extends the custody order for another 6 months and lists out specific things that need to happen before she'll consider any placement changes. She sets exact review dates so everyone knows the timeline. After court, we go back to the foster house and Max's wife makes simple turkey sandwiches for lunch. We sit around the kitchen table and I bite into my sandwich and taste the normal bread and turkey and mayonnaise. My phone buzzes in my pocket and I pull it out to see a text from Mom saying she just applied for a bigger 2-bedroom apartment that could have space for visits eventually. I read the message and take another bite of my sandwich and realize I'm chewing without counting how many times. I'm breathing without planning my next move to stay safe. I'm existing without the constant fear that's been my normal for years. Noah is telling Luna some story about his physical therapy appointment and making her laugh with his mouthful of sandwich. Luna is giggling and reaching for another chip from the bowl in the middle of the table. None of it is perfect or completely healed, but we're safe and fed and together, and that's enough for right now. Well, that is the grand conclusion we were all waiting for. If you are still watching, I have questions but also respect. You might as well subscribe because you are clearly committed to this nonsense. See you in the next disaster.